Let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me here today. I am super excited to be finally able to share all the cool stuff that we've been doing in master data services and integration services for SQL Server 2016. I'm also happy that it finally has a name, because internally it kept changing. I've been so used to calling it vNext. Now that I finally assigned a number to it, it's great. My name is Matt Mason. I'm a program manager in the SQL Server Information Management and Machine Learning Organization. We have the longest organization name at Microsoft, conveniently abbreviated as IMML. I'm on the information management side of things. Recently I've been most focused on master data services, but I've also worked on a number of data integration technologies at Microsoft. I will be presenting solo today. In the program guide, it showed that Jimmy Wong was supposed to present with me. Jimmy is the lead PM for the SSIS team. Unfortunately, he was not able to make it to Ignite this time around. But I was on the SSIS team for about 7 years. I think I still remember a little bit about it, so I'm happy to present both MDS and SSIS content today. OK. Quick overview of what I'll be talking about today. I'm going to start off with some of the kind of overview of the data integration space. It's probably what a lot of you guys know, but I just want to reiterate some of the things that are in our mind when we're looking at SQL Server 2016, especially beyond SQL Server 2016. The marketing guys kind of threw a bit of a curveball to me. Originally, we were told you are to talk about the things that are in the public preview, and then they went ahead and announced a bunch of features that are not going to be in the public preview. So I'm going to clarify what's in, what's out. I was frantically changing my slides after the keynote. So yeah, I'll talk about what's coming in the preview build, and what's going to be coming shortly after, and then what's going to be coming a bit further out in the SQL 2016 release. I will, of course, this session is going to focus primarily on SSIS and MDS, and I'll throw in some demos, and then I'll close things with what to expect in the future. Great. So let me talk about some of the things that are on our mind as we're going into this. So this is probably something that you guys are seeing. This is a quote from Gardner from back in 2012 about data warehousing and how the market and data integration market has hit this inflection point, right? There's a lot of things that you traditionally would do with ETL processing that are being disrupted. You need to start thinking about things in a different way, right? 5 main factors here. The increasing data volumes, right? Lots more data being generated, lots more data being processed. New sources of data, new types of data. I remember back in 2009, I created a set of Facebook connectors for SSIS, sort of as a joke. It was more of a sample, because who would want to connect with social media from an enterprise ETL tool, right? And now it's sort of a common thing. There's lots of SaaS services out there you need to start connecting to. It's not just traditional relational data sources anymore. And there's different types of handling and different types of ways of dealing with this data that changes from what you might be doing today. Real-time data has always been an issue, but combine real-time data with the sheer volume of new data that starts becoming things you have to start worrying about. Cloud-borne data. So it used to be all my data is on-prem. I would never process in the cloud, and now there's more and more data that never comes on-prem. Web server logs, things from SaaS services, right? Data coming in from remote sites. Hybrid infrastructures. It's becoming easier and easier to spin up these sort of hybrid cloud-based infrastructures. I was talking with a customer, I think it was at TechEd last year, who was saying how they had just moved all of their ETL processing, all their SSIS processing to Azure. Their dev environment, their test environment, as well as their production environment. And this customer, they do a monthly data warehouse load. End of the month, last weekend, they'll do a load of their data warehouse. They're pulling in data from remote sites that are geographically distributed. Data was coming over public internet anyways. Processing in the cloud made sense for them. And what they did was they spin up this massive VM, basically, do all of their crunching, do all the processing of the data, put it into a SQL Azure database, shut down all of their VMs, and pull down the data on-prem to load to their data warehouse. Now they have this very powerful, more powerful VMs than they would have had on-prem, and it only has to run for 6 hours a month. Right? And it was a very interesting use. He is definitely leveraging this ability to create these dynamic, right, environments and spin them up. As a Microsoft shareholder, it made me worry how we're actually going to make money off of this. But anyways, it was definitely working for them. So the main reason I wanted to talk about this was because I think with all these changes, there's a lot of opportunities. Right? I remember back 3 years ago, I was at a conference, a SQL conference in Hong Kong. And it's probably about the height of the big data hype, right? Everybody was talking about big data. Very few people were actually doing it. Those who were doing it were probably doing it wrong, which definitely brings back memories of high school. But we have, so it's the height of this big data hype. And I know my customers, about say 99% of my customers were not concerned with big data. They didn't have big data problems. They were focused on things like mapping nvarchars to varchars, right? You know, the traditional data integration challenges. So I was very surprised when this partner gets up on stage and says, you don't have a big data problem. Right? First time I've ever heard somebody say that. He said, what you have is a big data opportunity. Right? And for me, that was a fundamental shift in the way I started thinking about this problem. Right? There's new types of processing. There's new opportunities that you can start adding into your data integration. Assuming you get a time to sit back and think strategically about where you want to do and how you want to build your ETL infrastructures and data integration infrastructures. But there's a lot of new opportunities coming up, a lot of interesting technologies, such as infinite storage, right? Working with more and more partners and customers that don't throw data away anymore. They don't know what they're going to do with this data, but storage is so cheap that they'll just keep everything. Right? I remember working with a customer, a telco, this is going on 5-6 years ago, did the biggest SSIS installation I'd ever seen. They had a 160-node SSIS farm. They built this scale-out thing. They were processing 8 terabytes of data a day. You know how many days of data they kept in their data warehouse? 7. That was the most that they could keep because of the sheer volume sizes. Right? And they just threw the rest of it away. Now, with the recent changes, now they keep everything, right? They still keep that 7 days of data in their data warehouse, but they have everything archived to a data lake that they can later mine for data later on, right? With the infinite storage and all this infinite compute power, you can do a lot of big data processing, right? There's a lot of very interesting scenarios that you can tie in here, and I'll show how using SSIS, you can leverage some of those tools. Advanced analytics. I recently did a tour of customers that was talking about all the new advanced analytics stuff that Microsoft's coming up with. So Azure Data Factory, Azure Machine Learning, Azure Stream Analytics. Everybody seems to be interested in Azure Machine Learning, right? Imagine you can plug in, you create these models, you can do forecasting, you can do all kinds of interesting stuff, start plugging into your existing data flows, augmenting your existing BI things with this ML, with these ML models. Anyways, it opens up a lot of interesting processing opportunities. Dynamic infrastructure, I talked about scaling up to the cloud, being able to dynamically launch these very large processing environments and shut them down immediately when you're done. Self-service ETL. Any Power Query users out there? A couple Power Query users. So self-service ETL, data integration is hard, but we're trying to make it easier and easier. Power Query is a step in that direction, letting business users, people who aren't necessarily data developers, being able to do these pretty complex ETLs and merging of data. And we're hoping to leverage some of these technologies and capabilities in SSIS moving forward. Finally, real-time dashboards. Has anybody played around with Power BI on powerbi.com? Yeah, so one of the most interesting things I find from powerbi.com is their push APIs. Anybody played with those? Right, so BI fundamentally, right, it's a pull model, right? You write a report, you have some queries, you do a refresh, it reaches out, grabs data, and pulls it in, and then visualizes it. With PowerBI.com, they added some push APIs that let you push data into a dashboard, right, for real-time dashboarding scenarios. And that changes the way you start thinking about data integration as well. Right? Internally, we use Power BI for everything now. Our build status, our bug tracking, right? We just create these small little apps that push data into Power BI on a constant basis to get these nice real-time dashboards. I can immediately see bug counts. I can immediately see build status and build failures and things like that. It's very, very interesting. And it changes the whole space, the way you do this sort of BI processing. One thing remains constant with all these opportunities. Data integration is hard, right? So how many people are here are using SSIS? Everybody. So people listening in, 10,000 people just raised their hands. We have a hard job. Data integration is very tough, right? And the thing about data integration is there's a reason why BI demos never spend 80% of their time doing data integration, right? It's a hard problem to understand. It's hard for people to grasp how hard it actually is, right? Mapping Oracle timestamp data to SQL data, mapping all these data types together, dealing with developers changing a column and breaking downstream processes, right? All that stuff. we try to make it easier, right? Microsoft is really focused on making things easier, and we're progressing, but I think this space is always going to be hard. There's a couple other constants that remain. I think many people are going to end up with multiple environments if you don't already. Of the people using SSIS, how many people here exclusively use SSIS in their environments for data integration? So no SQL, no stored procedures, no custom apps. A couple of people. Wow. I'm actually impressed. Anybody raise their hand there? What I like to see is going into an organization who has standardized on a corporate ETL tool that's not SSIS. And when they do an audit, they realize that there's 5 times more SSIS in their environment than their corporately deployed ETL tools. Because part of the SSIS strategy really is attacking the department, right? Making it very easy to get up and running, easy to get up and started. And so you have this mismatches in some large organizations between the corporate and central ETL versus the departmental ETL. SSIS isn't always the best job for the best tool for data integration as well. Sometimes it is simpler to just write a batch script, to do things in SQL, to do a select into to send your data. So you end up with this mix of processing environments, right? And this is really the area that Azure Data Factory is targeting, a new Azure offering, to give you a single pane of glass to be able to see what's going on in your data lake or your cloud-based transformations and see your SSIS on-prem or multiple SSIS instances and seeing the lineage between those. Really one of the things that Data Factory, I'm really excited about Data Factory about. The other thing that remains constant is master data management. And so the story I like to tell here is working with an MDS partner a little while ago. And they were saying they were working on this very big MDS rollout to their customer. And the CIO or the CTO at the company decided, you know what, we're dropping all existing ETL processing. We are doing everything on Hadoop. We'll just move everything to Hadoop. We'll solve all of our data integration problems. Okay, I hear some chuckling. 6 months later, they're calling up the partner again and say, hey, can we continue with that MDS rollout? Because it turns out that you still need master data management, right? You have business data, you have reference data. Usually somebody's looking after it. Somebody has to own this stuff, right? In this case, the customer has tens of thousands of products, right? They actually have components that ship in other products, and they have all kinds of SKUs that they need to track. And they have dedicated people who own specific hierarchies or specific members of the products that ship. And day in, day out, all they do is that master data management and mapping which products ship in, or which components ship in which products, and building all that. Because without that sort of mapping, you can't do analysis, right? Without that good understanding and knowing that your data is cleaned and curated, you can't trust the results that you get in the end. So I think this is one of those things that even with all these fundamental shifts in the way you think about data integration, these things remain constant. So actually, a quick show of hands. How many people are using MDS currently? OK, so about half the audience. And so I think it's pretty standard. I mean, given you guys self-selected to be here for these topics. But usually when I'm presenting, most of the audience is an SSIS user. And we see about half, about 40%, 50% are using MDS as well. If you are an SSIS user and you've never used MDS before, the way I pitch it is this. If you're using SSIS, you're likely using data flows. If you're using data flows, you're likely using lookups. If you can imagine managing that lookup, that reference data in Excel, having a visual interface for managing that reference data, making sure all the values are right and can be corrected, then you want to look at MDS. If you're using something like SharePoint lists to manage business critical data, don't look at MDS. Right? MDS is for managing your lists of reference data. Right? At the simplest form, and I'll show this in my demos later, you can use it to easily get started just to do list management or reference data management. And you can build true master data up on top of that with hierarchies and security and things like that. Anyways, I'll go into that throughout my talk. So yes, let me jump into the focus areas for these products in SQL Server 2016. OK. So 4 main focus areas for us. On the MDS side, we really focused on performance. We made sorry, choking on water. We made some significant changes in MDS for performance and scale. Both MDS and SSIS, lots of manageability improvements. SSIS focused on connectivity, lots of new hybrid connectivity and just breadth connectivity options that are going to be coming in. And of course, we pay close attention to customer feedback, addressing some of the top pain points. It's usually the first thing we do when we go into a release. We go and talk to as many customers as we can. We put out surveys, basically to find out what your main pain points are. and we try our best to actually address those. Okay, this is one of the slides I had to add after seeing a bunch of features announced at the keynote. So I'll talk about the features that are in the public preview. There are a set of features that are coming after. So unfortunately, fortunately, a lot of changes went into SSD TBI. Unfortunately, the release of SSD TBI is postponed a little bit. It's pushed a bit further out. It won't be available. The new version won't be available for the public preview. But I'll talk about some of the SSIS changes that have gone in there. Things like making it so that from a single SSD TBI, you can manage any version of SSIS. You can work on SSIS 2012, 2014, 2016, all from one version of Visual Studio. And some just general designer improvements, incremental deployment, some other things like that I'll talk about. A number of the SSIS features, like the Azure Storage and HD Insight connectors that I'll talk about, are actually going to be backported and released for 2012 and 2014 as well, so they won't just be for 2016. On the MDS side, we focus primarily on the platform improvements. We want to get it out early, want to get as much feedback as possible on the core platform pieces. And we're planning to roll out the UX improvements later on in the release. We're always happy to hear feedback. Love getting feedback about specific things that you'd like to see. But we figure with the Excel add-in as a separate download, we can incrementally release it and release it out of band, basically. So if you see the public preview and there's something in there that you want to see, let us know. This isn't the final release. There's still a lot more to come in the future. Okay, so let's talk about some of the top pain points the SSIS team has tackled. Incremental project deployment. This has been a feature people want, I see some nodding. This is an interesting one. So in SSIS 2012, actually I should do the show of hands. How many people are on 2012? 2014? And 2008, 2005? Okay, so still a lot of people haven't upgraded yet. So in 2012, we made a pretty big change in SSIS where we introduced this new thing called the project deployment model, right? It's a way of bundling together all your SSIS packages. So instead of having individual packages, it bundles it as a single deployable project, right, that you send to the SSIS catalog. Deployment was always done as a full package, right? You deploy the entire project at once. One common piece of feedback was around wanting to be able to deploy individual packages. And we went back and forth on this. This was a big fight on the SSIS team for a really long time about what should be best. We went with the project deployment model because it kind of forces you into using and following software development lifecycle best practices, right? Using source control, doing regular builds, deploying the builds, not deploying one-off. I remember sitting with a customer and watching them deploy a package to their production environment, a single package that he had changed, and he was waiting for the package to finish because he didn't want the next SQL agent job to kick it off while he was deploying, and that just terrified me. But yes, so we tried to encourage software development lifecycle best practices, but a lot of customers don't want to do that, apparently. This is a strong feedback we got. They want to be able to deploy to their test environments or dev environments on a one-off basis. They don't necessarily want to do the whole project at the same time. Multi-version support in SSD TBI is another thing I mentioned. So this lets you develop, debug, and deploy multiple versions of SSIS from a single version of SSD TBI. There is actually now a property on the SSIS project. You set a target version, and that will be the version that your packages get output into. Actually, in SSIS 2014, we changed the package format, so there's actually no more version information. So the 2014 package format is the same as 2016. The main thing here is it supports 2012 as well, which is where the big change is. We made a number of fixes around projects, the project upgrade and the catalog upgrade, and I'll talk a bit about that on the next slide. And lineage and impact analysis. This is another big, highly requested feature. So the idea here is that you deploy your projects to SSIS DB, and there's a scanning process that's going to go through and find all the dependencies. Right? So this package connects to this data source and with these columns and goes through these transformations and outputs to this destination. So we can build a lineage graph, right? And in reverse to build an impact analysis. So you can ask questions like, if I change this column here, what's going to break downstream? Or I can do the lineage. I can say, I have this field on the database. Where did it come from? Where are all the transformations that it came from and things like that? And so right now the idea is that SSIS is going to collect all this data, put it into the SSIS catalog, and we're going to, you can access that. We expect partners to be building different tools on top of that and to extract that data, display it in different ways. We also plan to leverage this and surface this in Azure Data Factory, which has built-in lineage capabilities and visualization and stuff like that. So this is going to be one of those things that will surface in that single pane of glass that ADF provides. Any questions there? Okay, so I've started the things that are coming out post-public preview. Always-on support for SSIS DB. Is anybody running SSIS with always-on today? 2, 3, 4, oh wow, okay, a lot. Hopefully you're aware of the caveats around this. Okay, good, I see you nodding. So we went back and forth about whether or not to publish the blog post about describing it. Turned out that a lot of customers were trying it anyways and then hitting these cases where your instance won't start after applying a patch. Okay, so there's 3 issues, if you haven't done this before, there's 3 issues with running SSIS 2012 or 2014 in an availability group today. Specifically, this is the SSIS catalog, SSIS DB. The first is that after failover occurs, you need to run a quick script to reset the database master key to reset some of the encrypted fields so things will keep working. If you don't do that, failover doesn't occur right. And there's some things you can do with the service level keys and stuff to make sure it works. But in general, you need to run something after failover first occurs. This has been fixed in 2016. In Always On, when you configure an availability group, you can actually specify the database master key. So you just do it right there, and it will just work. The other thing is after failover occurs, your agent jobs don't automatically restart. State isn't automatically cleaned up. SSIS has now added an agent job that will detect failover and do that cleanup for you, basically reset your state. The third issue with running SSIS and Always On today is the bad one. The way SSIS DB gets patched during an upgrade, so if you install a CU and it applies a patch to SSIS DB, it does it when you start your instance. We're using the SQL Server method of applying updates. If SSIS DB is in an availability group and it's trying to apply a patch, it fails and your instance doesn't start. Okay? So you need to remove SSIS DB from an availability group, then install your CU. Some people forget that. Some people, yeah, anyways, it leads to bad things. Anyways, so we fixed that too. So now applying an upgrade to SSIS DB can be done through SSMS. You basically connect to SSIS catalog, right-click and say upgrade, and it will apply the latest patch. There's also an easy-to-use, they've tried to make it very easy to use. You can actually right-click on the integration services catalog. You say enable always-on support, and it will add your instance to your availability group. So they've tried to make this as simple as possible. Any questions there? OK. Expanded connectivity options. So there's 2 sets of connectors that are going to be coming out relatively soon. This is going to be targeting 2012, 2014, and eventually 2016 as well. First, we have the Azure storage connectors. So this is a task to upload blobs or upload files to blob storage, a task to download files from blob storage to on-prem, a for each enumerator that lets you loop through anything stored on Azure storage. So you can loop through blob storage, for example, and download all the files or process all the files. There is an Azure blob source and an Azure blob destination. So these are the Azure blob source, or sorry, destination lets you output flat files in either CSV or Avro format. And the source lets you consume files of the same type. So I'll talk a bit more about that on the next couple of slides. Power Query integration and Azure Data Factory integration. These are 2 of the things that are coming later in the release, but were announced yesterday, so I wanted to talk about them a bit. So with Power Query integration, we're still kind of working out exactly what this is going to mean. There's a couple of main scenarios here. One is for you're doing self-service BI, self-service ETL. You've created these very useful flows in Power Query. Now you want to operationalize it. Right? You want to put it into a real ETL process. You want to make sure it runs reliably. It has logging. It fits into your ETL framework, does all the data integration. We want to enable that grow-up path. So you don't have to re-implement all that data transformation logic you've done in Power Query. You just import that right into SSIS and execute it as a source. The other thing we want to leverage is the breadth of connectivity. Right? Power Query supports 35 data sources out of the box today. We are adding many more over the next few months. We want SSIS to have that same breadth of reach of data sources. Question?
Yeah, would that mean that SSIS would be able to run the M language inside of itself? Is that the thought there?
So the question is, does Power Query integration mean SSIS will be able to run the M language? So Power Query has an underlying language, officially called the Power Query formula language, unofficially called M. Yes, that's basically it. So you can imagine this as the most simplest form would be an M source, right? You could take the M, paste it in, or write the M, just put it into the component. And Power Query, or the M engine, does some interesting stuff. It can do predicate pushdown, right, pushdown optimizations, whatever you want to call it. But basically, if you apply filters, it will push it back to the source system. It can merge data across. It can merge data from multiple systems and push things down accordingly. There's a lot of power in Power Query. Yeah, we want to basically leverage all that data integration stuff from SSIS as well. Gotta get clapping. Yeah, question?
Will it be similar to like the Power Pivot for the tabular? Would it be that seamless?
Yes, exactly. So that's exactly the model that we're trying to follow. So one of the nicest things about Power Pivot, in my opinion, is the fact that you can do the self-service in Power Pivot. You create your models, take that, deploy it to a tabular server, and it works. Now you can add additional things around it. Same thing here, right? You take your Power Query ETL, the self-service ETL, lightweight ETL that you've done, deploy it in SSIS, and you can start wrapping the other ETL infrastructure around it, right? So there's the grow-up story, there's the breadth connectivity, and the other thing that we want, that we're looking to enable, is just the general ease of use of Power Query, right? It's very easy to explore data, to filter and shape. We've gotten lots of feedback. When the SSIS team did surveys about what kind of connectivity you want to see, Power Query consistently comes out as one of the top things. If you haven't checked out Power Query, I definitely recommend it. It's a very interesting product. And yeah, so we want to enable all those things. And so we're still trying to figure out exactly how that's going to ship, when that's going to ship, how that's going to look. But it should be there. Yep. Is there a connector for SAP? Power Query has a connector for SAP BO built in today. SSIS already has a connector for SAP BW. I know there's lots of flavors of SAP, not in my area, but yes, eventually we are hoping that we're going to be able to connect to all flavors of SAP. Any other questions about those things? We'll move on. OK. It's a bit more. So the Azure Storage Connectors is basically to enable hybrid ETL. And there's a couple of different scenarios here, right? I was talking about the scaling your ETL process up to the cloud and doing processes up there. So the main patterns here is you do some processing on-prem, you push it up to blob storage, you continue the processing in the cloud, or you do all the processing in Azure, you output to blob, and you download it afterwards, right? Blob becomes your persistence mechanism or your way to bridge your different processing environments. With the enumerator, it's nice. You can actually just loop over an entire container of files and download each of the files or process each of the files individually. They tried to make these very easy to use, pretty flexible. The source and destination, as I'll show in my demo, it's limited in terms of how much control you have over the flat file, like the delimiters and things like that. But that's where the upload and download tasks come into play. If you want a customized output format, output it with a regular data flow, and then upload it with one of the tasks. The other connectors that come along with this are the HD Insight tasks. Is anybody using HD Insight today? A couple of people. So HD Insight is Microsoft's Hadoop system, right, on Azure. Nice thing about this is that there's no CapEx. You don't have to build your own cluster. You can dynamically spin it up and shut it down once your processing is complete. And that's exactly the pattern that the SSIS tasks are meant to support. We call this a transient cluster pattern. So basically, there's a task that will create your cluster for you. You have a bunch of tasks that let you submit Hive jobs or Pig jobs, the big data thing that's going to run on your Hadoop cluster. You can then deal with the results. And then at the end, you shut down your cluster, delete it, so you're not being charged. Right? So this transient cluster pattern, very powerful for processing. And we're also looking at integrating these tasks, making them work with on-prem Hadoop flavors as well. We're targeting HD Insight. We'll see how the feedback goes. If we get the feedback that you'd like to see some on-prem integration as well, we could easily have a Hive task that submits to HTTP, for example, and things like that. OK? So let's move over to MDS and some of the MDS modeling improvements or general improvements in MDS, and I'll go into the demos. So we made a number of modeling improvements. This is one of the main customer pain points. There's a lot of small things in MDS, like limits to the size of your attributes, can't have special characters in the model names, things like that. So we made a number of changes there. We've simplified hierarchy management. We've deprecated explicit hierarchies. We only use derived hierarchies now. It was always the thing that tripped me up in MDS when I first got started, is the difference between and when to use one or the other. So hopefully we've simplified it. Everything you have today continues to work. It continues to work. It's all optional. But I think for new users, this makes things a lot easier. SSIS improved their deployment model. MDS had to improve theirs as well. So we have faster deployment, we removed size limits, and you could hit some issues if you deployed very large MDS models. It would try to load everything into memory during the load. Now we stream everything in nicely, and you shouldn't have those problems anymore. Performance. This is one of the big areas. So we released an update for the MDS add-in, the Excel add-in for MDS in January. Hopefully you guys have seen that and have tried it out. That works with 2012 and 2014. So that had a 4x to 8x perf improvement. And that's purely, we basically rewrote the Excel add-in to get that level of performance improvement. By the time we release 2016, we're going to be changing a lot of the server stuff. We're expecting a 16x overall perf improvement for most scenarios from Excel. We're also expected to scale, like today, MDS, our recommendation is about 1 million members in an entity. It's probably about the higher end, and then you can start running into some perf issues. If you do some database optimization, some tuning, some partners have some solutions that can bring you up to about 5, 10 million, or even 30 million, depending on the hardware. We are trying to target about 100 million members now. So we're going from the 1 million recommendation to about 100 out of the box with no additional tuning. We have improved entity-based staging. We've improved just overall impact of setting row-level security and all the security stuff. So just in general, MDS is a lot faster overall. And then the manageability areas that we focused on. So transaction log setting, this is one of the things that lots of users have mentioned. So in MDS, it tracks every time you make a change, right? It creates this transaction log, so you see the history of all the different members, of changes going on. And MDS sort of left it up to the administrator to figure out their own strategy for archiving this and backing it up and things like that. Out of the box, MDS has a retention strategy now. You can set a minimum and it's going to truncate. For most customers, for a large number of customers, you'll still want to have your own custom solution for archiving that log if you in fact want to archive. Based on the feedback we've gotten, most MDS customers are fine with just truncating most of their tables. They don't need to maintain infinite history for a lot of these tables, and they're fine with the truncation. So we made that really easy to configure. We support multiple sysadmins. This was sort of a shocker, but originally the person who installs and configures MDS becomes the sysadmin, and if they leave the company, you need to hack into your system to unlock it. Now you support multiple roles, so better role-based security. There's system admins, there's multiple system admins. You can have super users that can control everything. There's model administrators. You have a lot more finer grain security and roles. There's also a lot more granular permissions in MDS. So you can set at the row level and at the column level, you can set the ability to read, modify, create, and delete on a per user or per group basis. Any other questions about MDS? Then I'll jump into the demos. OK. Great. Let me wake up my laptop here. And switch over. You guys can see that? OK. So I'm running in sort of a mixed mode here. So as you know, 2016 isn't out yet. So this is using one of the preview builds. SSD TBI is unfortunately delayed. It won't be out for the preview release. So I'm actually using a 2014 version of SSD TBI. And it just seamlessly upgrades and runs with 2016 at this point. I'll show off some of the different connectors that I talked about. They're pretty straightforward, though. See, I've installed both of the connector packs. So I have a number of new tasks, right? I have the blob storage tasks, as well as the HT Insight tasks, the create, delete cluster, Hive, and pig tasks. And if you are using HDInsight and you like this sort of integration, please let us know if there's other HDInsight capabilities you'd like us to take advantage of. So yeah, let's just talk about the blob destination. Pretty straightforward. I originally was setting up this elaborate end-to-end demo, reading from master data services subscription views and doing stuff, and I decided just to simplify it down. I assume most of the audience is SSIS users already. In this case, I'm just reading from an MDS subscription view. So in MDS, you can expose any of your entities as a reference table and then use it for a subscription view, which is basically just a T-SQL view over your data. It flattens it all down. You can use that either as a source for reference data or as a source for your lookup or things like that. So quick, simple transfer up. The Azure blob destination has a minimal set of properties. You basically just set your container, so the blob name. You have a file format choice of CSV or Avro, and you can set a column delimiter. Like I said, it's pretty basic in terms of what you can do for flat files. I think the idea here is that we didn't want to recreate another flat file destination. If you want the custom control over the format, you can use the existing flat file destination and then upload the file directly to blob afterwards using the control flow. Similar here for the Azure blob source. Right? I'm just going to read that blob file from Azure. It comes down. Like I said, there's an Azure blob enumerator now as well, so I can add a for each loop, set the Azure blob enumerator, and loop over a container and process all the different files. That's useful if you're running on-prem and downloading from an Azure storage location, or if you are running in an Azure VM and loading from the persistent storage of Azure blob. You can load that straight in. I can imagine we'll add additional cloud-based connectors. We recently announced the Azure Data Lake, which is basically HDFS on Azure. I can imagine connectors coming out for that as well in the near future. So those are the quick overview of the blob connectors. Let's see how this looks, the HDInsight. This is one of the common patterns when you're doing HDInsight processing or orchestrating your Hadoop clusters from SSIS. So here I have a for each loop container that's looping over a set of files. I'm uploading that to blob storage. In parallel, I am then spinning up a new cluster. I can configure how many nodes I want the cluster to be in, like that. In the middle here, once my cluster is available, I'm going to launch one or more jobs that are going to go out and do things for me, run in a distributed fashion over all my HDInsight cluster. And then when it's done, I shut down my cluster, and I download my results from blob storage to process on-prem, data warehouse, do whatever I need to do. Any questions there? OK. Great. So that's an overview of those connectors. It's pretty straightforward. Configuring them, pretty simple as well. The only tricky part is the Azure subscription. So when you're creating clusters and things like that, you need to download a key from the Azure portal. If you use Azure frequently, this is a common scenario. But basically, you upload a certificate, you link to your certificate on the machine, and then you're able to interact with the Azure stuff. Great. Let me talk a bit about project deployment. And I'll quickly show incremental project deployment. So from here, right from SSDT, I can deploy a project. Run this. This is common if you haven't seen this already. This is the SSIS deployment wizard. This deploys my full project up to my SSIS catalog, unless it failed. And I know why. Never mind. I'll get back to that. So I can deploy in. I'm going to show the new deployment wizard that has incremental deployment support in it. Let me find this. So I have DTS. When we actually have the new version of SSDTBI, this will all be built in. For now, I'm running the 2016 version of this tool. So now I have this new option here. I can select my deployment mode. And I can pick my package deployment, which means I'm going to deploy individual packages into my project rather than the entire project in one shot. So I'll browse here to my incremental demo. It's going to show me all of my files. I'm not a big fan of incremental deployment, but here it is. You asked for it. And pick the files I want to deploy. I browse to my project. Click deploy. It's going to go through and send those files up to SSIS DB. And so from SSMS, here's my SSIS. I can browse to my project. And so I can see my newly created. So it's actually going to create a new version of the project. Even though I only selected individual files, it's created a new version of the project in SSIS DB, so I can roll back. All right, I still get that ability to roll back to previous versions. Question?
So with the older example of package deployment to the file system,
yeah.
Now, even with package deployment, it still goes to SSIS DB.
That's right. Yeah. The comment is, in 2012, we added 2 new modes of deployment. There's the project deployment model, which goes to SSIS DB, and package deployment model, which can go to the file system or MSDB. The choice of naming for the deployment wizard, a bit unfortunate. I think we're going to change it to either full project or partial project rather than calling it package deployment. Just to clarify, that's one of the things, that was one of the first pieces of feedback I had for the team as well. But yeah, so the general idea here is that I can pick specific packages to deploy. I can take full advantage of the project model. I can roll back bad deployments. I can go back to previous versions of the project if I need to. So I still get all those benefits of having that project deployment model, but we're now just a bit more flexible in the way you can do your deployments. Okay. Great. Pardon me? The question is this the version where package deployment goes away? No, we do not plan to remove package deployment at all. I think it's going to continue on unless we get overwhelming feedback that nobody's using it anymore. But there's still advantages. The main reason to switch over to project deployment model is that it makes it a lot easier to do the logging and the deployment and the child package execution and everything like that, because SSIS DB takes care of all that for you. If you've already invested in your own frameworks to do that, and you're happy with the way configurations work, you're happy with your logging configuration rate, you have all that already, then there probably isn't a big need for you to switch over to that, right? To switch over that infrastructure. We're aware of that. I think we're going to keep that package deployment model there forever. Right. Don't quote me on that, although this is recorded. I should remember that. But in the foreseeable future, there are no plans at this time to remove the package deployment model. Let me say it that way. Okay. Great. Any other questions about the incremental stuff? Yeah? Can you automate that with PowerShell? I'd like to say yes. I believe so. I think what they did was they added some new deployment functions, basically, underneath. It should be API functions that you're able to deploy to. And if they're not there, I will make sure that they get there. So we try not to do any real logic at the UI level because of the automation that you want to do with this. There's a question over here. So the question was around how rollback works. So internally, what we do, a project file is an ISPack, right? The ISPack file is basically a zip of everything. What we do is we store that zip in a table. You can actually see it stored in a table. What we're doing for incremental deployment is basically unpacking the old one, merging in the new files, and re-zipping it as a separate zip, and we just store that zip. So a rollback is actually just moving the pointer to the previous version of that zip file. So yes, if you were to deploy again, it would create another zip, and you'd be able to roll back and forth in between them. I don't recommend rolling back and forth. Really, the rollback mechanism is not meant as a replacement for source control, right, or version control. It is meant as a, oh, wow, I really shouldn't have deployed that. Let me roll this back type thing. It's not a replacement for source control. Although I have seen it. Based on the questions I get, I start to assume that that's how people are using it, which is unfortunate. OK. Quickly, I'll just show. I don't have an always-on demo set up. I don't have an availability group here on my laptop. But that's basically what they're doing here. It should be an easy button. You say enable always-on support. You point it to an availability group, and it will add SSIS DB to your availability group. Great. And that gives you HA capabilities for SSIS. Fantastic. Any other questions about SSIS? And I'll jump over to MDS, do a quick demo, a kind of intro, and then I'll talk about some of the new features there. OK. Who here has never seen MDS before? That's a quick question. OK, so there's a handful of people. Right. So MDS, and maybe I'll start very basic. MDS, like I said, is a way of managing reference data, right? So all the nouns within your business. So it could be a customers, it could be a place of locations, it could be assets, anything that needs to be tracked, anything you consider master data. Things that typically require some sort of curation or some sort of involvement. People own this stuff, they know this data, they maintain it, and things like that. The advantage of MDS over general MDM solutions or other MDM solutions out there is that it's very easy to get started with. You can do all of your modeling with existing data from Excel. The demo I usually show is how to get up and running with MDS in less than 30 seconds. Okay? And so I'll show part of that right now. So here I have a Power Query add-in for Excel. That's a nice, easy way to connect to data. I'm going to connect to an existing data set. If you haven't seen Excel, if you haven't seen Power Query, this is it. So I'll connect to a data set. I'll say edit. I can quickly filter and shape this data. Say I remove some columns I don't want. I don't need the names. I'm only going to keep the codes of these values. Let's set, say, keep top rows. So I'm just going to keep the top 500 rows here. Great. I'm happy with my data set. I can close and load. It's going to load to my Excel sheet. Now I'm ready to work with MDS. Actually, whoops, wrong button. I'm going to connect to my MDS instance, my MDS server. I will connect to one of my models. I will select my data. Whoops. Say create entity. I select my model. Let's call this customer. And there's two things I need to set. I need to set, so here's the data I just set. I selected my data, I select my model, I say which column is my code, and if I don't have a unique code, I can have MDS generate one for me automatically. And now I say, it's optional, but a column that contains my name value. Click OK. This is going to create my customer model for me and deploy my entity. A lot of MDM tools, it's days of modeling and doing all this fancy stuff to actually get to a point where you actually have a workable entity you can work with. MDS is just a couple of clicks in Excel based on your existing data, and now I have a working model. So from here, I could do things like, I don't know, I could make changes, right? And it tracks that this has been changed. I can, let's say, let me make a couple of changes here. Great. I can say publish, add an annotation, purposes, publish up. Great. And now every time I make changes, everything's local in Excel. I click publish. Now it goes to the MDS server, and anybody else who's connecting to this and downloading their view of the data is available for them. I can right-click on any member and see its full transaction history, so I can see who changed the value, why they changed it, any related annotations, right? So I get this change history of my master data. And I can do things like, so this is a single table, but I could start setting some domain attributes. Like here I have a gender field, right? I want, rather than having free-form text, I want to make this a constrained list. Let's have it generate a new entity for me. And based on the existing values in that cell, it's going to generate a new gender entity for me. And now I get a drop down, right? So I can actually change values back and forth like that. And so I can publish this up. One of the other neat changes, this is in 2016, is now, so notice that it's showing both the name and the code, and a lot of the times that ends up being duplicate data. One of the nice things I can do here is, under settings, data, I can select the display format of the fields. This is a commonly requested thing, so I can only show the code, for example. And so when I refresh, it's going to refresh the data. Now, instead of seeing the double, I only see the code values, so I don't have to have that duplicated in there. Yep?
Is there separate ways to get Power Query and master data into
Sorry, separate ways to get Power Query and master data into Excel? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so no. So Power Query and master data are both separate add-ins for Excel. They're downloadable. They're both available on the Microsoft Download Center. Power Query is actually going to be built into the next version of Excel native. Right now it's an add-in, though. You can download. They actually just opened up the license for it. It's now available for all versions of Excel 2010 2013, not just Pro Plus anymore. So definitely check it out. MDS is a separate download as well. It's available in the Download Center. It's linked to in Books Online and things like that. But yeah, download the version for 2014. It's completely compatible with 2012 and 2014 and has a number of performance enhancements to it as well. Okay, thanks. I should have called it out. Good question. Any other questions about the overall general flow? Yeah.
Is there a hierarchy management in Excel?
Question is there hierarchy management in Excel? Not yet, but it is on our list, and I'll talk a bit about that a bit later. Yep.
Do you ever point MDS to the Power Pivot model as opposed to the Excel sheet for data?
The question is, can you point MDS to the Power Pivot model? No. So remember, MDS always keeps a copy of what is on the server, right? The server is the end thing. I think it's interesting about using the data model. Maybe you could load larger amounts of data, but in the end, you need to commit that back. And the data model doesn't really like giving up its data, right? There's no actual way to read data out of the data model unless you are Excel. And so it's tricky. But it's something that I know we've discussed internally for dealing with. Because once you start managing entities with 10 million, 20 million, 30 million rows, you probably aren't using Excel. You'd use the web API, or you'd use a custom application to do this. The thing about MDS is it's built as a platform. We offer a couple of different UIs, and I'll show this. I'll show Excel, and I'll show the web-based UI. But it's a full, and underneath it's all a bunch of web service APIs. And what a lot of our customers do is build their own user experiences on top of this. Right? To really roll out an MDM solution within your organization to make it successful, you tend to have to integrate it into existing workflows. You don't want to send users to a completely separate tool to do their master data management. You want to integrate it into the tools that they already use. And so in that case, you tend to use MDS as a platform and just integrate it into another existing app or build your own custom UI for your users on top of it. Okay. So that was the simple case. I've created an entity and you have it linked. Let me open up another existing entity with a couple of different. I've actually defined a hierarchy. I'll go to the web UI and show that. So here I've actually created separate domain or link domains here for state and province and country, right? And so I can link these things together. And let me go to the web UI. So if you haven't seen MDS before, here it is. There's a web-based UI. This is where you do your administration, some of your advanced model creation, things like defining business rules and hierarchy management and things like that. We did revamp it a little bit. It looks, well, we've got a more modern look. We're going to continue to iterate on the UX as we go. We're also looking at moving more and more of the capabilities that you use in the web to the Excel add-in. We found that overwhelmingly our user base prefers using Excel for most things. So we are moving a lot of the capabilities like hierarchy management, creation, model creation, everything like that to the Excel add-in so you never have to go out, basically. It's going to be purely for managing very large entities that don't fit into Excel or for some advanced administration tasks like system maintenance and things like that. So here I can drill into one of my entities here. Let me show customer. So from the web UI, I can actually see my different members. There's some new features we've added in 2016, such as showing dependencies. So you can see if I select, for example, my country entity, I can see its dependencies. I can see country depends on customer, and there's a list of customers under that, as well as state province. So I can see that. I can see hierarchies. So hierarchy here I've defined as a hierarchy called region. Under region I have country, Australia, and then I have state and province under that. I can select and see the different values there. New feature in 2016 is this unused section here. So I can look at my hierarchies. Not only can I see what's been assigned, but I can see things that are floating, things that haven't been assigned to a hierarchy yet. So I can easily manage these things with a simple drag and drop. So I could click and drag this in, hopefully that worked. Great. And so now I've moved Ruben Torres under the Tasmanian thing, or I can even cut and paste him back into my unused. All right, so I can do hierarchy management and move values around here. There's some improvements in that in 2016. Let's see. Great. Let's talk a bit about the system administration. Drill back to the root. Yep.
With explicit being gone, how do you handle the ragged hierarchy?
So you can still enable explicit. I'll show that in a bit. If you need to have ragged hierarchies, you are able to add explicit. But by default, explicit is disabled. You'd have to use the derived hierarchies from there. We're still kind of working through that, actually. I think this is one of the things we wanted to get out early so we can get feedback and iterate on it. We're already working through it with our partners, the best way to simplify it, but yet make sure that everything still works with existing MDS procedures today. There we go. OK, so in the system administration task, let me show some of the new settings that we've added. So if I go and edit model, for example. So at high level, I can set a default log retention for my entire instance, but I can also set it at the model level. This is my default. -1 at this point means always keep all the history. And we have these nice tooltips now in the UI too to make it a bit easier to understand. At the member level, if we edit here, there's a couple of new settings. You can enable data compression, so basically row-level compression. So if your system is I/O bound rather than CPU bound, you can turn on data compression. It should give you an additional performance increase. It does increase CPU, but reduces I/O.
So down the road with the UI enhancements that will come later,
yeah.
the need for the separate edit mode and stuff like that, is that on the roadmap too?
Completely revamp? Yeah. So what we're doing is prioritizing Excel add-in stuff, and then we are going to look at changing the web UIs as well. But yeah, at this point, I think most of the feedback is that people have created their own custom UIs on top, integrated into their apps. So yeah, we'll get there. So the thing with the Excel add-ins, we know we can release it out of band. So if it doesn't make it into 2016, it's something that we can add shortly after. I think we're going to incrementally add new things. I can imagine the business rules editor would come first, maybe hierarchy management, but we're going to keep rolling that out. Our target for 2016 is really to make as many of the platform changes as possible, and then rolling out the additional UX stuff afterwards. Here I can re-enable explicit hierarchies as well if that's what I want to do. If you upgrade and you have an explicit hierarchy, this will be set to yes by default. OK. Quickly, so let me talk a bit about the security. So let me close this. One of the interesting features of MDS is the fact that you can set row level and column level security. So here I have another user added to my system, Larry the sales guy. I don't really trust Larry. He shouldn't be messing around with my master data. So from this administration page, I can go in and grant him a set of really fine-grained set of security permissions here. So what I've pre-configured for Larry is that he has read-only access to the customer entity of reference data. And I've given him read-write access, or read and update access, to only certain fields. So some of them are read-only, name, birth date, gender, but Larry is able to change the email address, phone, and address, and things like that. Right. That gives me column-level security. So basically what I'm saying is, okay, Larry is able to change the phone number for everybody. I can also assign row-level security. So I have a hierarchy defined, right? And so what I'm saying here, similar permissions here. If I do region, it's going to show me my hierarchy. The rules I've set here is basically I've said that Larry has read-write access to Canada and the United States, any members that are under those entities, or under those hierarchies. And if I launch Excel as Larry, simulate here, my low privileged user, I can go to the master data tab. I'll connect to the service. Notice I can only view the models I have access to, right, which is reference data. And I pull down customer. It's going to pull down all the things from the server. And it makes it very clear which values I have access to, right, and which are read-write. Right. Very nice. Thank you for the clapping. You're humoring me. I know. And so, of course, Larry can actually make those changes to those fields, but these other fields I'm unable to change, right? So it actually gives you very fine-grained control over what users can do. Yep.
Is there an API that exposes that query to see what that looks like?
Yes. So everything in MDS, everything is exposed through a web service API. So yeah, full WCF web service. You can do anything. You can completely rebuild your own UIs. We have partners that have done that, right? Partners like Prophecy that offer a whole software solution on top of MDS with their own enhancements. But underneath, it's all the MDS platform. Yeah.
When you say WCF, does it mean SOAP or
right now, it's a SOAP. We're looking at adding OData interfaces as well based on customer feedback. So far, we haven't heard too strongly. We've heard more OData for consumption rather than management and execution of functions. But at this point, it's all SOAP-based. Does it support reference from one model? So do you mean entity sharing, being able to share entities? Yes. So that is a coming feature. So that was one of the things that they announced. If you read into the data sheet, they announced that. That is coming. That did not make the public preview, but it should be coming very shortly afterwards. It's basically a way to say you define something like zip code for one model. You can say, share this with my other models, and it will be automatically kept in sync, and you have some options on how it gets shared. Basically, the story behind that is we initially implemented it in one way, and we got some initial feedback that in some advanced scenarios and not so advanced scenarios, it just got extremely complicated to manage. And we basically pulled it out of our public preview to revamp and simplify a few things for it. But that will be coming shortly after. That's one of the highly requested features.
What kinds of authentication is supported to detect that the user was indeed Larry?
The question is what kind of authentications? Everything's based on Windows Auth. Right. Yeah. That's basically it. Everything. Yeah. So your identity flows through.
Is there any plan to have support for OAuth and ADFS?
OAuth and ADFS. I'm not on our immediate roadmap. Personally, I find using OAuth flows are harder to implement from the developer standpoint. So far, it hasn't been a requested feature, but that's something that we could definitely consider. Okay. So I think that's pretty much it for MDS. Any other questions here? And I'll talk a bit about what's coming up in the future. Okay.
Little to the side. Is there any plans to have integration or connector for global term store and SharePoint?
Sorry, say that again?
So SharePoint sits on top of SQL Server.
Right.
I've got global term store, which is effectively hierarchical master data.
Right.
Managed metadata. But today, no ability to leverage my master data system in the system that's sitting on top of it.
So the question is there going to be integration between MDS and the SharePoint similar features? Not that I'm aware of. I don't think we've heard it mentioned too much, but that's something maybe we could talk about.
Be simple to do and sure help a lot.
Okay. No, that's really good. Yeah, I think that's an interesting area that we can look into. You're clapping. Great. Okay. Okay, question? So the question is, Larry had changed this data. Does it imply any of the database rules? So the rules in MDS are pretty simple. So if I go to functions here, click at it. These are the different roles that I can assign. So all Larry has is Explorer. It means he can actually see the data. Right? He's not an administrator. He can't do bulk import or export. He can't create multiple versions. These are more of the higher things. Usually, all of your users will have Explorer permissions. Right? It means they can interact with the system. These don't map to specific database rules. These are implemented at the MDS application at the SQL level. And then all the fine-grained permissions about read-write is all set through this interface, where you can assign Whether they're an admin, you can deny complete access and read, write, update, delete. So you can assign all that there.
So it truly is that this is connected with the privileged ID to the database where you can
That's
different kind of permissions.
right, yeah. So it's implemented at the MDS level. So you'd access this data to apply the security permissions. You'd access it through the web service API, which then would apply the permissions in the right way in return and do all of the checks. Yep.
Any changes in business rules?
Business rules coming up. I'll talk a bit about that on the next when I go back to the slides. But yeah, we plan to make some small updates there.
Yeah, I'm back to the Excel add-in.
Yep.
As a user experience, will I be able to filter on if I'm allowed to see a row?
And just remove all the rows.
Just filter rows that I'm allowed to change.
That is an interesting, yeah, that's something that we should log. I don't think it's planned right now, but that would be a very useful thing. Just basically remove all the read-only rows and only show the ones that you have access to. Yeah. Okay. So let me get back to the slides real fast. We have about 5 minutes left. Quickly talk about, quick summary. These are the slides that will be shared out after. So a quick overview of all the different changes that we've put in on the SSIS side. So incremental deployment, always-on support, better project upgrade, the connectors that I talked about for Azure and HD Insight, the designer improvements that are coming up, and the multi-version support. These are all coming after the public preview. On the MDS side, similar, so the Excel add-ins, lots of performance improvements, modeling and management improvements, and then security improvements overall. Actually, I don't know if I called it out much, but the smarter caching of permissions is important too. Previously, part of the guidance was if you wanted to scale your MDS system up above a certain amount of records, you don't want to be using the row-level securities because the additional checks can have big performance impact. We've greatly reduced that. We've put in a lot of optimization. We're a lot smarter about caching. So there should be an overall lower impact to actually implementing all the row-level security stuff. Great. So things that are coming up. I think I talked about most of these throughout the talk, but just to call them out again. So the Power Query source in SSIS, we're still working on the experience here about what it's actually going to end up with. But the three main scenarios are the grow up from Excel or from self-service ETL or self-service BI, the ability to leverage the mashup engine, our underlying component from Power Query, to do data mashup and push down optimizations to a bunch of different data sources, and the breadth connectivity that Power Query is offering. Support for multiple versions in SSDTBI, so basically one version of Visual Studio. SSDTBI can target any version of SSIS. You don't have to have multiple versions of VS anymore. Azure Data Factory integration. So there's a couple of things here. One is we want to be able to surface your lineage and impact analysis information up into Azure Data Factory. And you also want to be able to orchestrate Azure Data, your on-prem SSIS flows using Azure Data Factory. If you haven't seen ADF yet, I definitely recommend checking out the sessions here. They do cloud-based flows, primarily over HD Insight today. You can imagine in the near term, you'd have your cloud-based flows as well as your on-prem flows and see the links in between these different processing environments and how they're running, all from the single pane of glass that ADF provides. Some MDS features. This is the question we had about entity sharing, entity sync. That's going to be coming up very soon. There's actually a lot more than this coming in MDS. These are the most immediate things that will show up next. So yeah, this lets you actually share entities across models. Merge conflict resolution, so support if multiple people are trying to edit things, a bit smarter about how that gets resolved. Custom indexes, so if you have queries that are hitting specific attributes of your MDS instance, for performance, you might want to add a custom index there to support that. And we're also adding a separate or new subscription view for historical data. So that should make it easier to do type 2 dimension, type 2 slowly changing dimension and tracking all the data you need for that from MDS. Realize one thing not on the slide are the Excel improvements like the updates to the business rules, the business rule editor, hierarchy management, everything like that coming to Excel. That's a bit further out. That's why I didn't include it in these slides. Great. So that's a summary of what's there and what's coming up. Be sure to check out the other foundational sessions for SQL Server. It talks about all the different stuff that's coming in 2016. Lots of very cool functionality on the database side and across. sign up for the previews. Please submit evals, and thank you very much. I'll be here for questions.